You have a schedule. You probably have a calendar, a to-do list, maybe an alarm set for tomorrow morning. You move through your day with the quiet assumption that this is just how life works. But here is a question almost nobody thinks to ask. What did the humans who came before you actually do all day? Not the medieval peasant, not the ancient Egyptian, the real before, the version of you that walked out of Africa 100,000 years ago. What filled their hours? The real answer is far stranger than anything you have been taught. The most common image people carry is exhausting. The cave, the endless hunt, the brutal scramble for survival every single moment of every single day. You picture your ancient ancestor running, bleeding, starving, fighting. That is the story popular culture handed you. Prehistoric life was nasty, brutish, and short. Thomas Hobbes said it first and almost everyone believed him ever since. But anthropologists who have actually studied modern hunter-gatherer societies have found something that flips this assumption completely upside down. Marshall Sahlins called them the original affluent society. Not because they were rich, but because they were free. In 1966, at the Man the Hunter Symposium in Chicago, Sahlins presented a body of evidence that changed the way researchers thought about prehistoric life forever. He had studied data from the Kung San people of southern Africa and the Arnhem Land Aboriginal communities of Australia. His central finding was startling. These groups spent somewhere between 3 and 5 hours per day on activities directly related to food acquisition. Not 12 hours, not every waking moment, 3 to 5 hours, and then, they stopped. Think about what that means. You spend more time than that commuting to a job that pays for food that someone else grew, processed, packaged, and shipped to a building you drove to. Your ancient ancestor walked to where the food was, took what was needed, and came home by midday. The rest of the day was theirs. Completely and entirely theirs. So what did they do with it? They talked. This is probably the most underestimated activity in human evolutionary history. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar has spent decades studying the relationship between primate brain size and social group complexity. His research suggests that language itself evolved not primarily for hunting coordination, not for warning calls, but for social grooming. For gossip. For the maintenance of relationships in groups too large to pick lice from each other's fur. You think of gossip as something trivial, something shallow, but Dunbar's data suggests it was one of the primary engines of human cognitive development. The conversations your ancestors were having were not tactical briefings. They were talking about who was sleeping with whom, who could be trusted, who had taken more than their share. They were building and repairing the invisible social contracts that held the group together. That is what the afternoon was for. They played. This is another thing nobody pictures when they imagine prehistoric life. But the evidence for play among hunter-gatherer groups is consistent and widespread. Children played constantly, and not always separately from adults. Adults joined in. Games, physical contests, improvised performances. Anthropologist David Graeber, who spent years examining the foundations of human social behavior, argued that play may be one of the most ancient and fundamental drives in animal life. Your ancestors were not grinding. They were not optimizing. They were throwing things, chasing each other, laughing. They rested, and not the way you rest, in anxious stolen moments between obligations. Actual unscheduled rest, horizontal, without guilt, in the middle of the day. Studies of the Hadza people of Tanzania conducted by researchers Jerome Siegel and Gandhi Yiddish found that traditional hunter-gatherer sleep patterns look almost nothing like modern sleep. They do not have a rigid bedtime. They do not sleep for one solid block of 8 hours. They sleep when it is cold and dark. They wake when it is warm and light, and they take it as it comes. There is no word in many of these languages for insomnia. The concept does not exist. Because the pressure to perform sleep does not exist. They made things. Not for commerce. Not for sale. For beauty, for ritual, for the pleasure of making. The oldest known art in the world is not a painting of a hunt. The oldest cave paintings at places like Chauvet in France, dated to around 36,000 years ago, include handprints, abstract patterns, and detailed images of animals. The humans who made them were not necessarily hunting. Some of the depicted species were dangerous. Some were rare. They were painting them because something about those animals mattered to them beyond utility. They were not making weapons. They were making meaning. They told stories. Evolutionary psychologist Joseph Carroll has argued that narrative fiction, the ability to construct and share imagined scenarios, is one of the defining capacities of the human mind. It is not a byproduct of intelligence. It may be the thing intelligence was for. Your ancestors sitting around a fire in the evening was not just passing time. They were encoding the group's history, transmitting social norms, rehearsing emotional scenarios, training the minds of children to navigate a complex world. The story was the school. The story was the law. The story was the religion. And it was free and it was nightly and everyone was in it. They moved differently. Not the heroic sustained sprint of the cinematic hunter. Anthropologist Hermann Pontzer, who has studied Hadza energy expenditure in detail, found something that upended everything we assumed about physical activity and calories. The Hadza, who walk 10 to 15 kilometers per day on average, burn roughly the same number of calories as a sedentary American office worker. The human body, it turns out, compensates. It downregulates non-essential functions when activity increases. Your ancestors were not burning themselves out. Their bodies were calibrated for a kind of movement that was varied, unhurried, and woven into the texture of the day, rather than scheduled and suffered through. They were bored. This is the strangest and most important thing. They had stretches of real, genuine, nothing to do. And those stretches were not experienced as failure or wasted time. Boredom, in a world without screens, without notifications, without the constant availability of stimulation, functions differently. Neuroscientists studying the default mode network, the brain's activity pattern during unfocused rest, have found that this state is not idle. It is consolidation. It is integration. It is the mind processing what it has absorbed, building connections, preparing for creativity. Your ancestors were not less mentally active during quiet time. They may have been more mentally active, in ways that served them deeply. Psychologist Sandy Mann, who has studied boredom extensively, found that bored people perform better on creative tasks than people who are constantly stimulated. The empty afternoon was not a problem. It was the engine. What this all describes is a life that looks, from the outside, almost embarrassingly unproductive by modern standards. No career, no output, no deliverable, no growth metrics, 3 to 5 hours of food-related work, and then a long, loose, socially rich, story-filled, occasionally napping, sometimes beautiful, always unhurried remainder of the day. That was the human schedule for most of human existence. And here is the part that should unsettle you a little. Your body does not know the schedule change. Your nervous system was tuned over hundreds of thousands of years to that rhythm. The anxiety you feel on Sunday evening is not a character flaw. It is a mismatch. The exhaustion that sits behind your eyes on Wednesday afternoon is not weakness. It is a body asking, quietly and persistently, where the rest of the day went. The longing you feel sometimes for nothing in particular, for an open afternoon with nowhere to be, is not laziness. It is memory. It is something very old in you recognizing the shape of a life it was built for. You have a schedule, and now you know whose it is. It is not yours, and it was never theirs either. It was something invented very recently, by people who had something to sell and needed your hours to sell it. Your actual ancestors had afternoons. They had long ones, and they filled them with the only things that have ever actually mattered. Each other, stories, rest, and the quiet, unhurried, unmonetized pleasure of simply being alive in a world that was strange and enormous and entirely worth paying attention to.